One. All right, everybody, welcome to the Password Cybersecurity webinars. Today we have a very special guest who is Georgi Petrov from Malta Gaming Authority, or MGA for short, and we're going to be discussing the topic of insider threats prevention versus privacy. So we're going to let people gather, and for a while now, we're going to be discussing Georgi's background. And so I want to ask the question, how did you get into cybersecurity? How did you get into the position where you are right now? And what's your background?
Yeah, so hello everyone. First of all, thank you for joining the webinar. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Turpal and Password, for the invitation for the webinar. Onto your question, I worked with the Malta Gaming Authority for the past 5 years. Initially, I wasn't really into cybersecurity. My background was in business and IT. However, as soon as I started with the Malta Gaming Authority, I had the opportunity to work on numerous projects that involved cybersecurity. I had the ability to also take numerous projects for threat vulnerability, penetration testing, internal vulnerability assessments, and just the dynamic, the essence of cybersecurity sort of caught my attention, and I decided to start focusing on cybersecurity as my main area. I just love how dynamic and how much things you can learn from the field, how much all the ways that you can potentially exploit the system, all the different perspectives, being a red team, a blue team, purple team, and so on. It is such a vast field that it is so hard to get the grasp of it, and that's what makes it interesting at the end of the day. I'm the type of person. I just love having a dynamic environment.
I absolutely agree with you, and I would love hearing that answer because I'm the same. I'm very excited about the space in general because of all of the white hacking solutions and everything that happens in that space. Because again, when you're looking at the biggest hacks, the biggest like bridge hacks, whatever happened, and how much money was lost, and what things are used to prevent that kind of very malicious activity on the internet happening. And of course, when you're talking about all the technological advancements and all of the system designs that come into play, you just can't help but be fascinated about it, and that's how you get into the space. And yeah, that's how it usually goes. But again, when we're discussing our topic, and the reason why we're choosing a topic like this is because the systems that are put in place to defend from certain attacks and of course in certain breaches, they're kind of impenetrable, and it usually would involve a lot of computing power for you to actually go and do something like that. So the bad actors usually prey on an attentiveness, or people being in a rush. Phishing attacks are always like a very like prevalent type of attack that you can get, that you can be a victim of course. And usually most of the people right now are the victims of phishing attacks, because again, one moment of inattentiveness, or you like click a link in a direct message that you got from someone, and boom, all of your passwords, all of your data is lost. And it's a very malicious kind of attack that people do. And so yeah, moving on from that topic, there is of course also insider threats, because again, you cannot always be sure that everyone involved is on the same page. And usually it doesn't really happen, but again, there is a risk of it happening, and that risk of course deserves to be discussed. And so the first question that I want to ask, of course, aims to explore the ethical implications of monitoring and the balance between security and privacy rights, because again, we're talking about insider threats, because usually insider threat programs often involve monitoring employee behavior, as we know, and that most of the time raises some privacy concerns. It never happened with me, but for some it does. And so the question is, are insider threats and are insider threat monitoring programs just a facade for surveillance? And if so, where do we draw the line there?
Yeah. Before moving on to the question, I think it's only fair for our audience that I introduce a little bit about the Malta Gaming Authority. And since we're talking
Oh yeah, of
about
course.
the prevention and that we have within the authority, I think it's only fair for them to understand the authority as a whole. So basically, the Malta Gaming
Absolutely.
Authority is the gaming regulator on the Maltese Islands for remote and land-based gaming. We try to regulate with competence through an open and collaborative approach. We do so by promoting a fair and sustainable gaming ecosystem. And above all, we also try to promote a safe, sustainable, and responsible gaming industry, basic gaming sector. Now, having said that, one would appreciate the type of data that the MGA holds about our licensees, about the players, about the employees. There's a lot of critical data within the authority that I have the privilege to take a responsibility to safekeep, right? Now, moving on to your question about the whether insider threat monitoring is just a facade for surveillance. I don't believe that it is a facade if implemented properly, right? So in order to implement it properly, you need to have proper oversight in place. What do I mean by that? For the very first question you need to ask yourself when you're implementing this insider threat program is to see what are you actually collecting about your organization. Are you collecting the right type of data? Are you collecting too much, right? If you're collecting too much, perhaps you should ask yourself, hey, why am I collecting this sort of information? How is this information going to help me with alerting, with investigation, and so on? Ideally, in my perspective, from my point of view, you should be collecting metadata. So what is metadata for the sake of definition? Metadata is data about data. It is the fact that something happened, not the context of the data, right? And you need to ask yourself, am I collecting too much? This is basically where the line is being drawn, right? I'll give you an example. So imagine that you have a data loss prevention tool, a monitoring tool, let's call it tool A, right? It is collecting a lot of information about your organization, information that you don't necessarily need to know, but you still collect it, right? That can include financial data, context of emails, instant messaging, agendas, basically events about the laptop usage of C-suite employees. All of a sudden, you end up with this cluster of data and you're collecting too much, right? At the end of the day, you have a security analyst who is having a look at this data, right? He's analyzing the alerting. He's looking at the context of this data, right? What happens one day if you potentially have the security analyst leave the organization or they're terminated? You end up with somebody who knows so much about your organization and you don't really have much control over it. So this is the line where that defines that you are doing monitoring for the sake of safeguarding your organization, and you're doing monitoring for the sake of surveillance, right? I'll give you another example. So back in 2013, a lot of you, I'm quite sure, from the audience know who Edward Snowden is, right? Basically, just a brief overview. Edward Snowden was a whistleblower with the NSA, with the National Security Agency of the United States. He is the ultimate insider threat at the end of the day, right? What Edward Snowden did was he leaked top secret information. Whether it was right or wrong, it is not for me to judge, of course. It is for the audience. I'm quite sure there's fans and there's people who think otherwise about Edward Snowden. However, at the end of the day, he leaked a lot of top secret information, right? He was able to do this because essentially the NSA was collecting so much about domestic and foreign intelligence, and he had access rights on their systems, right? That would show him this information, and at the end of the day, he ended up being he had that excessive information in his hands for him to leak at the end of the day, right? So this is where you draw the line. When you're collecting so much, you understand a lot and nothing at the same time. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean it does. That was actually a great example. And to set an example from Passwork side, you also mentioned when people leave. Of course, there is that threat we have a security feature that's called the security dashboard, which allows us to precisely monitor every single password that has been viewed and used by a certain person that has left the company. And it automatically gives you a notification that, oh, this person is no longer working for the company. It's time for a security update. And that's how it works. But then again, yeah, that was actually a very good example and a very good answer to that question. But of course, also understanding the nature of threats helps organizations allocate resources effectively and implement the appropriate security measures, like you meant, like you explained. Because again, when you're collecting the data, you're collecting metadata, and that's how it works. And insiders typically have more access to sensitive information, such as the example that you made. But outsiders can also explore the vulnerabilities. And so I want to ask the next question of like, who poses a bigger risk? The trusted insider with unrestricted access, or the outsider with just enough credentials?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Turpel. Yeah. So if you had to ask me, I believe that the bigger risk, I believe, for an organization is when you have an outsider with just enough credentials. Why? Reason being is that when you have an outsider with even very limited access to your systems, right? They're essentially unpredictable, right? You
Yeah.
don't know what their motives are. You don't know what their technical background is. You don't know what they might do to your system, right? Essentially, if they're a seasoned technical expert, for example, a hacker, right? They will be able to move laterally to other systems. They would be able to perform privilege escalation, for example, if they find the necessary vulnerability, if they find any vulnerabilities on your system that they might exploit, right? And this will be devastating, I would say, for your organization. Having someone on your network who is an outsider, even with the smallest access, right? Obviously, if you don't have the safeguards in place, right? Now, if you look from the perspective of the insider with unrestricted access, even though this is not the best case scenario, because ideally you should never have unrestricted access to anyone, right? No one should have unrestricted access.
Yeah.
An insider is more controllable. He's more predictable.
Yeah.
There are certain safeguards in place that you can put to ensure that essentially you're limiting this access in the future, right? It is something you can actually do something about it, right?
Yeah.
You can do access control. You can do role-based access permissions, right? So yes, if I had to pick between one and another, I believe that I would rather have someone on a trusted insider on my network, which is a lower risk, right? And the outsider who has just enough credentials has the bigger risk in my case, right? That's in my opinion. Going back to the Edward Snowden example, right? So Edward Snowden was working for a person called Sam Adams, I believe, was his name. Yeah. Back
Oh,
then,
could you repeat that, Georgi? I think your connection went
hello,
south there. Yeah.
can you
Can you
hear me?
repeat? Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Going back to the example of Edward Snowden, because obviously he's the ultimate insider threat at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the best example.
Truly.
Looking at this perspective, you might ask me, okay, you have the National Security Agency. How was he able to exfiltrate this amount of data, right? The reason being is that at least from what Sam Adams, who was the manager of Edward Snowden back then, at least what he's telling us and what the NSA is reporting, Edward Snowden, before he actually managed to exfiltrate the data, he was a system administrator with
Yeah.
privileged access, right, to the system. He was able to essentially disable certain security features on his device, right? Right before he was able to extract this data, exfiltrate this data, take it out of the organization, right? He was given the role of a system analyst or something of the sort, right? Unfortunately, this is where you need to have proper procedures in place. Edward Snowden was not revoked the system administrator access, and not only he was able to access this top secret data, but he was also able to exfiltrate it and not remain undetected at the time, right?
Yeah.
So this is, I think, a perfect example how a perfect example as well for the question that it meant there are multiple things that you can put in place to ensure that
Yeah.
you're safeguarding against that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree. Data management is, of course, a very difficult task to maintain. And when we're addressing the challenge of data management, there's also the importance of effective analysis tools in detecting these threats. And so the next question I want to ask is this, like, of course, in the flood of insider data, like it happened with, for instance, like Edward Snowden, how do you separate critical signals from distracting noise? Because again, the sheer volume of data generated by monitoring tools can be it can be pretty overwhelming, and it can make it like pretty hard to identify like the genuine threats.
Yeah, this another great question. So, how do you separate the noise from signals, right? Okay, so going back to my first point, I
Mhm.
think you should have a look at the root cause of this. So, how much are you actually collecting about your organization?
Mhm.
Why are you collecting this data, right? Because by in essence, a lot of unnecessary information, a lot of unnecessary logs, a lot of unnecessary events and alerting would cause unnecessary noise, right?
Mhm.
You need to determine what makes sense for you to collect and analyze, right? So I think it's very important that we make a distinction between noise and signals, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. Let's say that we have an employee and this employee downloads 500 files from a shared drive over the span of 3 hours, for example, right?
Mhm.
What I would consider noise as somebody who is looking at this data is that, for example, this person is part of the finance department. This is something regular for them because every end of quarter they need to do their reporting, right?
Yeah.
They need to catch up on deadlines. They're accessing the files that they're accessing are, for example, spreadsheets or something related to their department. You're not seeing any attempts to exfiltrate this data to take it out of the organization, right? Using
Mhm.
a USB or using a cloud service, for example.
Mhm.
The moment it becomes a signal is when the same employee is scheduled for offboarding, the HR basically approaches us or opens a ticket, and they will tell us, "Hey, this employee is scheduled for offboarding in 3 days," right?
Mhm.
And then you will see, for example, data. You'll see events where this employee is trying to access folders that are not related to their department, and they're attempting to rename them and put them on cloud storage. This is the point where you flip that switch and you say, hey, this is a signal. This is something I really need to
Mhm.
have a look at. So you need to, first of all, you need to ensure that what you're collecting is the right type of data and is not
Mhm.
just garbage data. It's not
Yeah.
this blob of data, I would say, that doesn't make any sense to collect. And secondly, you need to look at the context of the data, right? To separate
Mhm.
whether this is a noise or a signal, right?
Mhm. All right. Yeah, that makes absolute sense because again, if we're talking about the CISOs that are put in place, and of course, and well, all of the people that are working in the cybersecurity segment, or like the in the category of monitoring these risks, you would have like a keen eye on all of these things. And yeah, um, I want to take the conversation and like encourage a discussion on accountability and of course the need for robust security frameworks to mitigate insider risks. Continuing on from what your previous answer has been to the previous question, and there's another thing because again, insider threats can arise from poor system design, inadequate controls, or again, malicious intent, as we previously mentioned it. And so we have the next question: um, if insiders exploit the access granted to them, should we blame the system's design or the lack of security controls?
Okay. Very interesting question again. I think it depends on the case, Turple. I think in this case
Mhm.
of both, and I'll tell
Yeah.
you why. I believe that okay, let's say you have a system, and this system obviously grants access to unprivileged access to a user, right?
Mhm.
If from a user point of view, unprivileged user point of view, you have access to data you should not have access to due to, for example, a misconfiguration or a misconfiguration in the roles, or, for example, a vulnerability that might allow you to extract data, something that is not meant for you to see, right? I believe this is a design flaw, right? You should be blaming the system design. In my career, I've came across, unfortunately, you see this more often than not. You have a system that is not that, for example, did not take security by design posture, basically, and you would see instances where I would have normal system access, and unfortunately, the system would reveal more than I should be seeing. Right? This is where
Yeah.
this is where the design flaw is initially introduced. Right? This security security design flaw, basically. Right? Now, if we have a system, a robust system that took the necessary measures to have security by design, so during the development phase, right, of the system, it has fine-grained controls, it has role-based access, right? It has been tested rigorously to ensure that nothing is being revealed to those people who don't need to see such information, right? Now, obviously, that I would say is an operational security risk, and you should be blaming the operational security. Why? Because the people who are in charge of that system did not ensure that the right people have the right access, basically, right? It is not the system to blame there, right? So it really depends, Turpal here. That are we talking about one or the other? Like it really depends on the scenario.
Yeah, I guess that there would be like a decent amount of balance in that question because again, is it the system's fault? Is it the lack of security controls? Because again, when you're discussing this and you're taking it to the next level, and of course, when you're put into a company and you're trying to find out what exactly happened, if something goes wrong, you're definitely going to have a balance of the both because again, yeah, the system is cool, but there is some flaw to it. But again, no system is perfect, and there was a sort of lack of security control that led to whatever happened. And of course, I had this like very eager thing to learn about. So I want to understand how organizations, of course, continuing from your previous answer, how can organizations maintain trust also while ensuring security, which is of course crucial for the healthy workplace environment, and of course keeping the balance of rigorous security controls and the system being perfect, because continuous monitoring can lead to a culture of mistrust among employees, which usually happens. And so, yeah, the question reads, how do you balance insider risk programs with employee trust, especially when programs feel like constant surveillance?
Yeah, I understand. In certain cases, obviously, I do not believe that's the case of the MGA, but in certain organizations, you might have the cases where, yes, if you have rigorous monitoring, and some employees might feel a bit unease, I guess. They might think surveillance. They might think we're the big brothers, essentially, right? That we're constantly looking over them. What I think that the way to kind of prevent this and to prevent this is basically to ensure that you're building those programs, those insider threat programs and tools in a transparent and clear way. What do I mean by that? It means that you're making aware, you are telling your employees in policies, in contracts, that essentially data might essentially events and activity on the systems and laptops and servers, whatever, will be monitored for the safeguarding of the organization, right? For its system. In certain cases, you can also define what you're collecting, right, and be clear about it. That's up to you to decide what type of transparency and clarity you want to have. But I really believe that you should make it a point that yes, there are certain monitoring tools in place that are monitoring, but you should make it a point that it's not for us to constantly look at you and what you're doing or tracking your work, for example. We're here to protect the organization's cybersecurity posture at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Another way you can prevent this is to also take a risk-based approach, right? So you need to ensure that the tools that you're using are properly configured. They're not constantly monitoring, right, your employees. you do not, for example, log and review every employee's web browsing and keystroke daily, whatever they're doing on their laptop and instant messaging content, for example. However, you do have alerting for risk-based behavior, right? So, for example, if an employee is accessing sensitive company data, and then, for example, at the same time, you have a correlation that this employee is trying to access personal webmail or, for example, Dropbox or WeTransfer. This is where you should take a risk-based behavior approach, and that's when you should be kind of actioning those alerts, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this actually also ties into the previous webinar we did on why why employees ignore cybersecurity policies that are put in place. And yeah, that couldn't have been more perfect continuation of that webinar that we did. But I want to explore the evolution of threat detection strategies and their effectiveness in, of course, I guess, proactively addressing the insider threats that happen. And so, yeah, because I guess traditional approaches often react to incidents rather than preventing them, and hence why we're having this discussion. And so I have another question. Should insider threat programs shift from reactive detection to predictive prevention?
Okay, yeah. Should they shift to more predictive than reactive? Yes,
Yeah.
I do believe that they should shift to a more predictive approach. Why? The problem with a reactive approach is that quite often having a reactive approach comes a bit too late in the progress, meaning that first of all, you have the incident happening, and inside the threat, they're able to exfiltrate, take out data out of the organization. And then having a reactive approach, it means that you'll be alerted after the fact, right? So you know what was the issue there? You no longer have access to your data. You no longer have control over your data. What happens to the data that was exfiltrated, that was taken out of the organization? You don't know what the intention of this person is, whether it will end up on a dark web, whether it will be sold to malicious actors, right? This is the problem with reactive programs.
Yeah.
That's why I believe having a predictive approach is more efficient in the long term, right? So in the last couple of years, everybody has seen how AI has advanced. You have ChatGPT and all of these machine learning tools. It's just amazing, right? Everybody it just hit the world and revolutionized everything, right? The way that we can use machine learning is to detect certain things that a normal human analyst would not be able to detect, like myself. Every human being at the end of the day would have a flaw, I would say, that if you have, for example, some very gradual signs, I would say, for example, if an employee, let's call him Mike, for example, if we have any mics, I'm not referring to you. So if we have an employee and we call him Mike, for example, and he starts to take out or exfiltrate one file at a time, or just a small amount of files at a time, right? Over a long period of time. So, for example, we say every day over the next couple of weeks, right? The normal human analyst would not be able to probably pick that up, right? It will be some low alerts. Okay, this is something related to his work. Perhaps it's nothing, right? And you just kind of continue with your work, right? What predictive prevention, like for example, using AI tools, can allow you to do is that it would see a specific abnormal pattern in the behavior of the employee. So all of a sudden they're doing their work, and all of a sudden every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever, they are exfiltrating. They are taking one file or multiple files at a time, right, out of the organization, not in bulk, because they're aware of these security methods in place, and they will say, okay, I'm not going to try to raise too much suspicion. Let me just not do this in bulk. I'm going to take one or two over here and there and just say hello under the carpet, This is where reactive approaches predictive approaches can really come in handy, because they would pick something that the human eye would potentially not detect, right?
Yeah. I guess that makes sense because, again, this discussion also leads me to my next question, because I also wanted to investigate the potential of password management tools such as Password, of course, the host of the webinar. If you want a free demo, scan the QR code. Yeah, so investigating the potential of password management tools such as Password in strengthening the defenses against insider threats, because I think password managers are they are the definitive enhancement security, because they allow you to manage your credentials, but their role in insider threat mitigation, I think, is often overlooked because, again, when we're using a password manager and the administrator happens to be someone with access to everything else, they can essentially fine tune the access levels of different employees that are in the company, which of course Password allows you to do. And so this question is kind of a long reach, but I think passwords are like a must. So yeah, I wanted to ask, can password managers evolve from, again, didn't really want to call it a convenience tool. It's more like a basic tool that you absolutely need to have. But can it be this, critical defense against insider threats?
Um, in I believe the password managers can be a good part of it. I believe. So the way that password can really can helps us, at least as an organization, is that you're able to store essentially secrets, passwords in a
Yeah.
secure way. You're able to delegate and have role-based access
Yes.
to those
Yes.
credentials, right? You're also shown, you're also able to enable the right password complexity, right? And ideally, you're also rotating your passwords periodically, right? To ensure that if
Yep.
someone has taken this password and decides to use it in 6 months, it won't be the case, right? However, what I believe that we actually helped us in the past is that there is an effective audit trail of the credentials, meaning that
Yep.
let's say if you're investigating an insider threat and you want to see what type of credentials or secrets this person has accessed, you have a fine-grained audit log of what of which passwords this person accessed, right? So it can be
Yeah.
very helpful to have factual audits, right? To a factual audit train of the credentials that this person used. So yes, it is a very big part of it, I believe, and it's very useful for any investigative team.
Yeah, I got to say thank you for that, because that was a callback to the previous question that we managed that we answered, because we mentioned a little bit of the security dashboard, and if someone leaves, you're automatically getting a ping about what needs to be changed. And yeah, overall, it's actually a great tool. And as I mentioned again, if anyone watching wants to get a free demo of Password, be sure to scan the QR code, and we'll catch up there. But with that being said, I want to kind of examine the limitations of current detection methods, and I guess the challenges of proving this malicious intent, because again, that also happens. And the fact is, correlation based detection can identify the patterns,
Mhm.
but more often than not, it maybe or maybe not struggles with establishing intent behind the actions. And so, yeah, the question reads, yeah, most insider threat detection systems depend on the correlations, but can they ever prove the intent behind them?
Okay. Very interesting question. Yes. So correlations. I believe correlations do not equals are not equals to causation or more motivation, right? Meaning that just because you have one or two correlations, you cannot prove malicious intent at the end of the day. Like, you need to have a look at the bigger picture,
Yeah.
right? Of the activity that this person had, the background, and so on, right? Let me give you an example. So let's say that person X, we'll call him Mike again, starts logging into the systems during the weekend. And then, for example, they started accessing files. You might say, okay, why is this person accessing data during the weekend? Right? That does not on itself prove malicious intent. This person might simply be chasing deadlines. They might be working with overtime. Yeah, you cannot just label the person as a malicious insider, right? Just because of that. What
Yeah.
again? What you need to have a look is the broader picture. Are there any other abnormal activities over time? Is this person having additional events, like they're trying to plug in a USB removable drive, for example, or are they trying to research how to bypass certain security mechanisms, right? You need to build and have factual events, basically, to label someone as a malicious insider, right? The same thing goes, like, for example, are they trying to transfer files? Is it something generally, if you look hard enough, you always understand, you always see intent, and no matter how much a person tries to hide it. If you're collecting what is necessary, if you're collecting the right type of data, if you have the right rules in place, the right alerting, if you don't have a lot of noise in place, you'll generally be able to predict intent.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, in general, predicting intent in some cases might be, kind of impossible because, again, with everything that you mentioned, yeah, maybe they're just chasing deadlines. But yeah, I think that overall kind of clears it up. But Georgi, I wanted to kind of get your opinion on like some of the highlights of the specific concerns and that you may have, and maybe something that you've managed to assess the adequacy of, for example, like the existing tools for threat detection, because again, different scenarios pose varying levels of risk, with the insider and the outsider, as we mentioned. And again, as we've managed to coherently collect so far with the questions that we've answered, preparedness is the key to effective response. And so, yeah, I want to ask you another question. Which insider threat scenario worries you the most, and do you genuinely have the best tools to detect it before it's too late?
Yeah, I would say too, but I would say that what worries me the most, what kind of keeps me up at night, if you can say that, right? With data leaks. At the end of the day,
Yeah,
everybody's susceptible to them,
true.
every organization, right? At the Malta Gaming Authority, I would say that I'm most worried because at the end of the day, as I mentioned, the authority holds some critical data about our licensees, about players, a lot of sensitive information, right? So, and somebody who is entrusted with the cybersecurity function of the authority, that's what makes me worry, I would say, every day, to ensure that we have the tools in place, we're capable to detect them, we're capable to react, and if the worst case comes in place, we are able to also investigate and understand, have a factual basis of what actually happened, right?
Yeah.
In terms of tools, I would say yes. What we do is we don't only have tools, but we try to take a multi-layered approach. I believe that any mature security function should have a multi-layered approach, meaning that you don't have one point of failure, right? So you should have, first of all, what is your first line of defense, right? For against data leaks, for example, you'll have your EDR, you'll have your solution that would essentially prevent people from accessing certain websites. They'll to prevent them from having USB removables. Then, for example, if you have somebody who is trying to take out data, you can have data classifications in place that will detect that. Then you can have data loss prevention tools that are analyzing what is happening within your network and in your organization. But most important, like we mentioned, is the monitoring aspect as well, to understand what actually happens, when you have such an incident. Because I think essentially it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. Every organization out there, that's the fact. Every organization out there will fall victim of, for example, a data leak or anything like that. It is, the probability is yours are against you, unfortunately. So what you need to do is stay prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It takes me back to a saying where they say no system is safe. Of course, some might dispute that, and of course, some systems might ultimately be safe. But then again, you made a great point. It's not the matter of if, it's about when. And taking all of the necessary precautions, getting this burger of all of the lists of things that you do to make to extend that when to infinity, that's the best way to approach cybersecurity, in my opinion. And I think it probably does not keep you at night. It probably does not keep you up at night, but it's of course a safety concern, and it's a concern of your job as an employee at MGA. So I think, yeah, with so far having worked 5 years, no problems. I think you'll manage to do.
In some cases, it does keep you up at night, but yes, in yes, apart from other security threats, of course, but talking about insider threat, that's, I believe, the
Yeah,
most worrying bit.
it can be very bad, and usually when it happens, it hits you very hard because
Yeah,
again, you mentioned the fact that a data leak is the worst thing that can happen, because that data leak can lead to so many other things that can happen, especially with the data of people that are not really aware of cybersecurity policies that you need to, of course, adhere to. Like not clicking random links or not believing everyone that calls you from a scam center saying that, oh, your account has been breached, you need to log in, you need to connect my computer to yours with TeamView and
yeah.
have like hidden, yeah, seen a lot of videos like that, and it usually happens like that. So yeah, thank you for that great answer. But with that being said, we're going to move on to our final question, and this question is, I think, so I made this question to explore the trade-offs between security and trust, because again, that's the main topic of the webinar. And I kind of wanted to prompt like a discussion on finding the balance that protects both. So like, where do we find that this median that is going to be perfect for both prevention and the privacy, and everyone's going to be happy? Because again, uh, total visibility can enhance security, but it does come at the price of privacy and trust of the employees. So yeah, this question is kind of I don't want to say it's like provocative, but again, I think I managed to do a very good job to tone it down. Would you sacrifice employee trust for total endpoint visibility, or is there a middle ground?
Look, Torpal, I think that essentially, like, you need to ensure that within your organization, above all, you build a culture of trust. What
Yes.
do I mean by that? You need to ensure that, first of all, you're educating your employees. I cannot emphasize how much education is
Yeah.
important for your organization. Ensuring that your employees have the right knowledge about cyber attacks. What we do at the authority, for example, is that we have um, constant phishing and training campaigns, basically to make
Oh,
sure that our users are aware about these sort of attacks, about data protection training, and so on. What does this help with? Right? How does this come insider threat? If you remember at the very beginning of the webinar, I defined that there is the malicious type of insider threat and
yeah.
the negligent sort of cyber threat, the
Mhm.
ones who don't have any intent, but they still fell for a phishing
Yes.
email or something of the sort, right? This is where a large portion of insider threat comes from, right? And you can essentially prevent that from happening by having a rigorous training program, right?
Mhm.
But
Yep.
yes, at the end of the day, you need to ensure that you're building a culture of trust, right? You cannot, at the end of the day, even though you have the tools and you need to ensure that you're monitoring and you're preventing, right? At the end of the day, we're not policemen, we're not the big brother, we can't
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
everywhere. So you need to have some element of trust. And I think that's
Mhm.
super, super important in an organization. If you can't trust the person on your left or the person on your right, how can you do your day to day? How can you ensure that the integrity of your systems and your data
Mhm.
is there, right? So there's the middle ground. You need to ensure that you have the right systems in place, that you're not potentially surveilling everything, right?
Yeah.
Um, However, like you need to have the systems in place. However, you to verify, but you also need to have the trust in place. So trust, but verify.
Yeah.
That's where I stand.
That's actually a very good combination, trust but verify. Um, and it also, again, perfectly connects everything that we have done so far on the webinars with our previous guest, Tristan Roth from ISMS Copilot. He also emphasized that education is key for people not, ignoring the cybersecurity policies. And again, with that negligence fact that you mentioned, a lot of people that might fall for a phishing attack, or in a moment of inattentiveness might lose crucial data or like crucial keys that have access to certain data parts. And yeah, that's actually a great example. I think it sets the precedent for the space in general, that there needs to be more education and that lack of knowledge needs to be covered. But yeah, all in all, it's perfect, and I agree wholeheartedly with you, Georgi. Um, but yeah, with that being said, that was actually my last question, and I think we managed to cover everything that we wanted to cover inside of the topic of insider threats. And that was a bit of a combo there. But yeah, I think it went well. I think the people that have watched this, and of course will watch it on YouTube or will be uploading it, will enjoy it. And yeah, I got to say a big thank you from me and the team of Password for joining us today. We managed to cover a lot, and there's just so much more to come. And for everyone watching, if you wish to use a very good insider threat tool, such as a password manager like Password, make sure you scan the QR code and get a free demo. And yeah, Georgi, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me. It was a real pleasure, Tupol. Hopefully, we'll be able to do something like this in the future. Thanks a lot to the audience for
Absolutely.
joining as well. I hope that it was insightful for you. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's goodbye for me for now.
Yeah, but before we say goodbyes,
Yep.
just wanted to get your last message to the audience. Of course, yeah, we provide a platform, and yeah, if you want to talk about MGA, if you want to talk about yourself, or just send a general message, here's your time to do that. Georgi?
Yep. Hello.
Yeah, your final message to the
Yeah, my
audience.
final, the key takeaway. Yeah, the key takeaway from this, I believe, is that first of all, you need to, like I mentioned, you need to ensure that that you have a insider threat program that does not collect everything, as we
Mhm.
mentioned, and and you need to have a culture of trust and a culture that you are essentially educating your employees as much as possible. These are the great takeaways from my end.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the takeaways from my end too. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I just stole that from you, but yeah, I couldn't. I could not have put it in better words. Yeah, education, making sure everything is good, and of course, um, fostering this very great ethnical and of course corporate culture inside your company to make sure that everything is safe and that you have a balance between privacy and prevention and everything goes smoothly. So yeah, that's going to be it. Thanks to everyone that joined us today. We're going to do many more of these, and you should be expecting the next one on the 15th of July. Take care and goodbye. And again, thank you, Georgi, for joining us.
Thank you.